we expect on housing, and we will listen in its entirety. We will get to Conservative Leader Pierre Poilievre when he switches to English as well. Full coverage of both leaders today on Campaign Day 9.
Is in great hands. And I would like to thank the many members of the United Brotherhood and Sisterhood of Carpenters and Joiners who are joining us here today, as well as the exceptional group of Liberal candidates behind me. Well, we're here today because Vaughan, as Francesco reminds me, Vaughan is at the epicenter of the building trades in Ontario. And it's home to extraordinarily skilled women and men who are literally building this country. And extraordinary is exactly what we need right now because, as Gregor and Jennifer just alluded to, these are not ordinary times. We are facing the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. And we are going to build our way out of it. President Trump is trying to fundamentally restructure the U.S. economy, and that means our economy will have to change dramatically. As I made clear to the President in our call last week, I will reject all attempts to weaken Canada, to wear us down, to break us so that America can own us. That will never happen, ever. My
response and that of my Liberal team in this unprecedented time is to fight, to protect, and to build. We are fighting with our own counter-tariffs. We are protecting our workers and our industries by ensuring that every dollar collected through these counter-tariffs will be used to protect our workers. Because my government learned the lessons of the new trade order. We must take care of ourselves. We must be there for each other.
Above all, what we need to do is fundamentally reimagine our economy. We need to build a new Canadian economy, a more resilient economy that can succeed in what will be a drastically different world. We need to build that economy so that it works for everyone. Now, as a start to see how to build, we should draw inspiration from what's worked in the past. Let's go back to a time when we built things in this country. And if you visit almost any community in Ontario, you will see countless streets of houses that are about 80 years old. And that's because during and just after the Second World War, Canada was facing a massive housing crisis, similar to the one we're now in. In response, the government of the day built tens of thousands of affordable starter homes for returning veterans and their families. Many of those homes were built by skilled tradeswomen, like our friends from the Sisterhood here today. You see, the Liberal government of William Lyon Mackenzie King had a plan. They created new agencies to oversee the construction of homes. They found ways to cut costs and to cut the time to build. They built, in the process, entirely new industries, and it worked. Canada built its way out of that crisis into post-war economic strength. Decades of rapid growth, decades of prosperity. Today's reality is that even when Canadians, particularly young Canadians, are doing everything right, when they're getting a good education, they're studying hard, they've secured a well-paying job, they're saving up, they often have barely enough to pay the rent, let alone to afford a home of their own. On average, across this country, it takes over 4 years to save for a down payment. For first-time buyers, it's 6 years. In markets like Toronto, even longer. There simply aren't enough homes, so housing is just too expensive. Now, it doesn't have to be this way. We have solved a housing crisis before in our past. We can solve the housing crisis now. It's time to build. And my government has a plan to do just that. We have the experience, much of it standing behind me, and we have the resolve to get this done. Today, I'm announcing that my new Liberal government is flipping the script on housing with a new approach to build faster, build smarter, and to build more affordably. Unlike Pierre Poilievre, who thinks slash and burn is the answer to every problem, we're going to address failures in the housing market head on. And we're going to unleash the power of public-private cooperation at a scale not seen in generations. Our goal is to double the pace of housing construction to almost 500,000 new homes every single year. Homes you can afford to buy. Homes that are more sustainable and cost less to live in. Homes made right here with Canadian ingenuity, Canadian labor, Canadian products, including mass timber. The first part of our plan is to create an entirely new entity, Build Canada Homes, a lean, mission-driven organization that will do several things. First, it will act as a developer on new affordable housing projects. It will catalyze a new housing industry. It will provide financing for affordable home builders.
Our plan begins with the creation of a new entity, Build Canada Homes, a lean, mission-driven organization that will act as a developer on new affordable housing projects, stimulate new residential industry, and provide funding to affordable home builders.
We're getting government back in the business of building affordable homes. Acting as a developer, Build Canada Homes will work with industry to build affordable homes at scale, including on public lands. We'll make good on the promise to unlock federal lands for home building on a post-war scale. Build Canada Homes will also provide $10 billion of low-cost financing to builders to construct deeply affordable homes for those most in need, as well as housing for students and seniors. And Build Canada Homes will catalyze the creation of an entirely modern housing industry in this country. We need to take our construction sector to the next level. There are 80,000 vacancies and another 300,000 workers set to retire over the course of the next decade. Labor productivity in this sector has been stagnant for years. And at the same time, construction costs are up 51% in recent years. The way we build homes needs to change. Prefabricated and modular housing will play a big role in the future. They can drive down the time to completion by up to 50%. They're cheaper to build by up to 20%. And they're a more sustainable way to build, producing 22% fewer emissions than traditional construction methods. And the good news is we're already home to many new prefabricated housing factories. We want Canada to be the world leader in this new innovative industry. We should be that leader. That's why we're providing $25 billion in financing to scale up that industry. And in the process, we will create good jobs up and down the supply chain. Good jobs in innovative housing research, such as the UBC Smart Structures facility that I visited this past February. Good jobs in prefabricated and modular housing, like those in Sherbrooke, Quebec, in my own riding of Nepean, or in Calgary at ATCO. Good jobs in our world-class forestry industry by using Canadian lumber and mass timber, such as that which is being pioneered in Elmsdale, Nova Scotia, where I visited last week. And of course, at the heart, at the core, good jobs, great jobs in the skilled trades for hard-working people like the folks behind me who will be busy building these homes for decades. Build Canada Homes will build deeply affordable and middle-class housing, single-family homes, high-rise apartments, and everything in between. And on top of creating that entity, that new structure, Build Canada Homes, the second part of our plan is to drive growth by making the housing market itself work better. Taxes and regulations have been choking the industry and making it difficult, in some cases impossible, to build. Canadians are paying the price. That's why, for the next 5 years, my government will cut development charges, taxes on home building in half for all multi-unit housing. That's $40,000 off the cost of a two-bedroom apartment just south of here in Toronto. We'll fund new housing infrastructure to cover the lost revenue, while expecting provinces and territories to do the same. And
to incentivize real estate developers, we will also keep the accelerated deduction for people buying rental housing. In the 1970s, that tax measure allowed us to build tens of thousands of rental housing, allowing builders to recover their costs more quickly so that they could continue to build, engage, and innovate. The last government brought back that measure, and my government will ensure that even more builders have access to it. We will also take advantage of pre-approved design for housing in order to reduce red tape and work with other orders of government to avoid duplication, because we must have a single Canadian economy, not 13.
We are pragmatists, so we're going to also double down on what's already working. The new Housing Accelerator Fund is an example. It's gaining traction. And countless mayors who've signed on from Guelph to Red Deer, Quebec City, have said it's building more homes in their communities. Pierre Poilievre is ignoring them when he commits to eliminating the Housing Accelerator. Because I listen and learn, my government will not just keep it, we'll reinforce it, including by publicly reporting on municipalities' progress to speed up permitting and approval timelines. By getting government back into the business of building affordable homes, and by making the market work better, we will drive a huge increase in housing supply so we can bring costs down for Canadians. We will build at a pace not seen since the Second World War. Cet investissement,
this investment, the largest in generations, builds on the measures that I took in the first 9 days I was Prime Minister, such as reducing the GST for first-time home buyers if the price is below $1 million, a tax cut that will allow Canadians to save up to $50,000 on the cost of their first home, a tax cut that means that first-time home buyers will have to put less money aside and be able to move in sooner, and help a larger number of Canadians realize their dream of home ownership. Whether you are a firefighter here in Vaughan, a paramedic in Kenora, or a teacher in Kingston.
Our government's housing plan recognizes that it won't be business as usual. That never works in a crisis. It's all hands-on-deck strategy. It's an industrial strategy to get millions of more homes built. It recognizes that young Canadians can't wait any longer. It recognizes that they deserve the same opportunities that previous generations, like mine, had. It recognizes that sometimes government, your government, needs to step in and step up. Now, unfortunately, there is someone who just doesn't get it. Someone who thinks the answer to everything is a slogan or a tax cut. Someone who worships at the altar of the market, but who never has actually worked in it. That's Pierre Poilievre. C'est le type de politicien de carrière qui vénère.
He's the type of politician that venerates the free market, even though he has never had to sign a paycheck. In fact, Pierre Poilievre wants to remove a housing policy that works well and just let the market do the rest. That is not leadership. It's ideology. And it is an ideology that doesn't in any way understand how markets work.
Unlike Mr. Poilievre, I've actually worked in the private sector. I know how the world works, and I know how it can be made to work better for everyone. I know, liberals know, that markets are the most powerful tools we've ever invented. They can help find solutions to our greatest problems. But we also know that markets can fall short, especially at times of great change. In Canada, we have a huge need for new housing. This is an insurmountable challenge if, like Pierre Poilievre, your only plan involves fiddling with the tax code and slashing programs that work. But if you actually want to build the future, this challenge is an amazing opportunity. It's an opportunity to create entirely new, highly competitive, job-rich Canadian industry that will work for everybody. One that uses Canadian technology, while creating the need for more carpenters, more joiners, and a lot more Canadian lumber. We get that. Liberals get that. Pierre Poilievre never will.
We don't know what the United States' next moves will be, but what is clear is that as Canadians, we have the power. We are masters in our own home. We can control our destiny. We can give ourselves far more than any foreign government, such as the United States, could ever take away from us.
More than any foreign government, including the United States, can take away. But to do that, we need to do the things that were previously thought impossible at speeds we haven't seen in generations. We can build things in this country again. We can ensure that if you work hard, you will be able to afford a good life. We can create secure jobs, a strong economy, affordable places to call home. We can build an independent future for our country, stronger than ever. We can build Canada strong. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Paul Chang, one of your candidates in Markham, talked about turning over a Conservative candidate to the Chinese consulate to receive a bounty placed on him by the Chinese Communist Party. Can you explain why you've not dropped him as a Liberal candidate?
Thank you for the question. Look, the comments were deeply offensive. This is a terrible lapse of judgment by Mr. Chang. He has apologized for those comments. He has apologized directly now to the person that he mentioned, apologized directly to him yesterday. I've spoken to Mr. Chang as well over the course of the weekend to understand his position. He is a veteran policeman. Mr. Chang is a veteran policeman with more than a quarter century of service to his community. 28 years of defending rights in this community. and he will continue with his candidacy going forward, having made those apologies very clearly to the individual, to the community, and moving forward to serve. Alors, les commentaires en question étaient
The comments in question were fundamentally offensive, and Mr. Chang has made a terrible error in judgment, and I spoke to Mr. Chang over the weekend. He repeated his apologies. He apologized directly to Mr. Tai, who is the person involved. So this is a regrettable situation. However, he will continue with his campaign.
Said apology is not sufficient, and then previous to this, he was speaking with the RCMP about his safety. So I'm just wondering why you feel comfortable continuing with a candidate that was parroting Chinese Communist Party talking points to try and attack a political candidate.
Look, this is a person of integrity who served this community, his community, as a senior police officer for, as I said, more than a quarter century. He's made a terrible lapse in judgment. He's made an apology for that. It's also an individual who has family in Hong Kong. He's under no illusions about the situation there, the situation in broader China. He's made those apologies. He's made them directly to the individual concerned. He's made them directly to me. He has my confidence. Thank you. En effet, c'était la même question.
Well, this was really the same question. He made his apologies. I spoke to him directly. And I have just highlighted the fact that Mr. Chang was a police officer in the Toronto region for a very long time. He has 28 years of service. And he is very familiar with the situation in China and Hong Kong, and he will continue with his candidacy.
Good morning, Mr. Carney, Rafael Canyon, CBC News. It's not just opposition parties calling for Mr. Chang's resignation, it's also at least 13 civil society groups. What message are you sending to Canadians who are worried about pressure from China when you allow him to stay on? And how can you credibly criticize Pierre Poilievre for his lack of security clearance when Mr. Chang is considered a worthy candidate?
Well, the first thing, I can very credibly criticize the Leader of the Opposition for being at 930 days running and not having a security clearance. I will say as well, in the course of my responsibilities, current responsibility, I didn't do that, that wasn't me. I did manage to cut the piece of wood second time running. Although I was under expert supervision. No, getting back to these are serious matters, so I appreciate the question. But in the course of my responsibility as Prime Minister, just yesterday, I received an additional briefing on foreign interference and potential matters related to that. Of course, I can't share any details of that, but it just underscored once again, I take my responsibility seriously, but the extent to which Leader of the Opposition does not and hasn't for more than 3 years. In terms of, but to go back to the specifics of your question, this situation. Look, I deeply offended by those comments. As I said, they're a terrible lapse of judgment. I view this as a teachable moment. It underscores the respect with which we treat human rights in this country, the differences between Canadian society and other countries. This, after all, though, I will go back to the character of the individual who made a lapse judgment. This is someone who has served our community, has been on the front line of policing for almost 3 decades, and has been standing up for those rights and has that track record for it. He's made his apology. He made it to the public. He made it to the individual concerned, made it directly to me, and he's going to continue with his candidacy. Thank you.
I notice multiple GTA area candidates behind you. If you're still standing behind Mr. Chang. Why isn't he standing behind you today?
He has other responsibilities in his riding. We don't have every. We have multiple, but not every candidate. I know Yvonne Baker's off doing different things. People are doing things. They're out talking to Canadians. I'm honored that these candidates have found the time. I'm honored that Gregor Robertson, and let me just say a word about Gregor Robertson for a second. This is an individual who obviously has served his city. He understands these issues around housing as well as anybody in the country, and he understands as well, along with the Minister of Housing, who's snuck back there, yes, Mr. Erskine Smith, how the solution has to be an integrated solution. It's not just about change. We are changing a number of regulations, we are changing things on the tax side, but we have to create new entities. And we have to build all the way through so that we can build a sustainable, competitive housing market in this country. Thank you.
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada.
Quel est le problème avec la loi 96
What
au
is the
Québec?
problem with Bill 96 in Quebec? Well, first of all, there's not necessarily a problem with it. I want to be clear on that. There's not a problem with it. I understand. I fully understand the need to reinforce and protect and promote the French language in Quebec. I have made big efforts, extensive efforts in that area, including strengthening Radio-Canada, and there certainly is a linkage between the two. My government is uncomfortable with preventive use of the clause that allows it to do certain things. And that is a well-known position on the part of the Liberal Party. So I think this will be a matter for the Supreme Court to resolve.
To be clear, I understand the objective of Law 96. It is, and I support the objectives. Support the objectives of the importance of la laïcité in Quebec, and the protection, the promotion, the reinforcement of the French language in Quebec. And that's one of the reasons why we are foursquare behind Radio-Canada, and you will hear more about that in due course. It's a related issue. It's not direct, but it's a related issue, which is why I raise it. The challenge that we see, I see, my government sees, is the anticipatory use of the notwithstanding clause. So in other words, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is suspended in anticipation. That is, and that I have a problem with that in any circumstance, whether it's labor laws here in Ontario or whether it's in that circumstance. These should be judgments directly for the courts, and a sort of fundamental approach, which is in Canada, un droit est un droit est un droit, a right is a right is a right, and if governments are going to override those rights, perhaps for valid reasons and get a balanced right, it should be much clearer and not assumed away at the start. To just assume away the Charter at the start is the challenge. So it's a structural, if I may, final point final, c'est un problème structurel avec l'approche.
It's a structural problem with the approach being taken, not necessarily the law itself. You say you are generally in agreement with the goal to strengthen the French language, but do you agree with all the content of Bill 96? Well, I'm neither a lawyer nor a judge nor a constitutional expert, and this is a constitutional matter. And the content? Well, let's say that I agree with the goal.
Judy Chin, CTV News. Mr. Carney, I'd like to press you a little bit more on Paul Chang. He lives in a riding that is 70% diverse, people of color. Half of that are people of Chinese ethnic origin, and of that population, about 20% are from mainland China. The question that people from Hong Kong have asked me to ask is whether or not you are putting appeal to those voters who may support the policies of China ahead of the democratic rights and safety of dissidents who have called Canada home, and mainly Hong Kong democracy activists who now live in Mr. Chang's riding.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Stand foursquare for rights, foursquare for our position, our very strong position vis-a-vis China, respect for Canadian citizens, all rights of Canadian citizens, irrespective of whether they hold dual citizenship or not, to be absolutely clear. And Mr. Chang has long history of service to that community, history of protecting those rights. Mr. Chang is well aware of these issues, including having family in Hong Kong.
How can he be an effective representative for them when they no longer trust him after he said this? The question, as you know, Mr. Carney, you know that Canada has executed 4 Canadians this year.
China.
You know that there are human rights activists in China in detention right now. How can Mr. Chang, how can your party keep him as a candidate knowing this context?
Mr. Chang has apologized for his comments. It's a lapse of judgment. He apologized for he's apologized for his comments. He's apologized directly to me. He's apologized directly to the individual. He has a long record of service. He's going to continue his candidacy. Okay.
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney, Hélène Moka de la presse canadienne. J'aimerais revenir sur la loi 96.
I'd like to come back to Bill 96. For everyday Canadians or Quebecers, can you clarify whether a Liberal government will challenge Bill 96 as far as the Supreme Court? If so, for what reasons exactly?
On verra.
Well, we'll see.
Pas de cas maintenant.
There is currently no such case before the Supreme Court of Canada, and for everyday Canadians and Quebecers, the issue is whether we have rights here in Canada or not. A right is a right is a right. If we use the notwithstanding clause too often in a preemptive manner, then basically we're saying there is no Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada. But that is a matter for the Supreme Court to rule on. It's no more complicated than that. We have heard you say that French is very important to you, but how would a Liberal government ensure the protection of French other than through Radio-Canada? Well, for example, we have just created a new minister who is responsible for culture and Canadian identity. The minister in charge is Minister Guilbeault. He is a proud Quebecer, and he is charged with a mission, which is to promote and protect the French language by using all the powers and tools available at the federal level. So this is very important for us. That's one aspect, and there are other aspects as well. But most of the ministers in my cabinet are francophone.
Monsieur Carney,
Oui.
sur l'annonce du jour, vous proposez la création de Bâtir Maison Canada, et on peut lire dans le communiqué que vous allez transférer tous les programmes du logement abordable de la SCHL à cette
Oui.
entité-là.
Oui.
Est-ce que c'est un désaveu de la SCHL? Elle ne faisait pas bien son
Non,
travail?
merci pour votre question.
No, thank you for that question.
C'est important ici. Il faut avoir
It's important.
Selon moi, si on a des grandes
And
organisations comme
as
le
far as I'm
CRCL,
concerned, if we have
il faut
a
être
large
ciblé.
organization
Il faut
like
être
the
ciblé. En
CMHC,
effet,
we
le
have to be
CRCL
targeted.
fait de financement
when it comes to financing. Certainly, there are a lot of programs that are already in place, but this is not an entity that can develop housing. So we must create a new entity for that purpose and bring together all the current initiatives that are not necessarily working very well at the CMHC, but then we will be becoming more ambitious with Build Canada Homes. This is a big, big change. Ambition today is doubling the pace of home building to 500,000 new homes per year. That's incredible. And that is the reason why we have workers here, like the ladies and gentlemen behind me. It's a great opportunity for our country. And it's an opportunity that will allow us to build a new economy without looking to the United States. Thank you very much.
The core point on the structure of it was such a great ending. I'm not going to be able to recreate it. The core point on CMHC, to use the English acronym, is these big organizations, they work better if they have a sole purpose, a clear purpose. And what CMHC, and the minister knows this, has been doing has been providing mortgage insurance financing, other forms of financing, but also having a few programs in affordable housing. It's not very good at the second, with all due respect, and it's not its primary focus. So we're taking those programs, existing one, we're bringing them together on an entirely different scale, with entirely different tools in Build Canada Homes. And I was just finishing by underscoring the scale of ambition that we're looking to double the rate of home building, 500,000 homes a year, which is what this country needs, building an entire industry behind it, getting the great people behind me and those like them across the country, careers, like decades and decades of work in carpentry and joining and beyond the other trades. All of this in a way that builds the strongest economy without any regard to what goes on in the United States. That's Canada Strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. If you're just joining us, welcome inside the CBC Newsroom. My name is Natasha Fatta, and we have been taking you live to Vaughan, Ontario, just outside of Toronto, where we've been listening into the comments coming from the Liberal Party leader, Mark Carney, also him taking questions from reporters there. There's a lot of coverage for you in this day 9 of the election campaign, including the full comments coming from Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre. We're going to bring those to you in just a moment, but I do want to turn immediately to our colleague Kate McKenna, who's joining us now live from Ottawa with a synopsis of what we just heard from the Liberal leader. What stood out for you, Kate?
Well, I guess the headline is that Mark Carney is standing by Paul Chang, who is a candidate in Markham, after comments that he made about a Conservative candidate, Joe Tay, saying that people could claim the $1 million bounty on him if they took him to Toronto's Chinese consulate. So these comments have been roundly decried as deeply offensive, not just by other political parties, but also by Hong Kong civil organizations. But Mark Carney today saying he's going to keep him on as a candidate. He says that he's apologized. He's apologized to Carney. He's apologized to Joe Tay. He's apologized publicly, and he's been a police officer for a very long time, and he is a man of integrity. I am going to go out on a limb and say that probably that will not be sufficient for people like Mr. Tay, like the Conservative Party, who have been saying these comments are beyond inappropriate, they're shocking, and that no apology will be sufficient. Joe Tay put out a statement earlier this morning saying he does not accept the apology, that Paul Chang did reach out to him, but he did not accept the apology when he was offered it, and that he lives in fear now following those comments. So Mark Carney, though, standing by him, not dropping him as a candidate at this time. Now, he is in the GTA. My colleague Rafi Boudjikanian made the point that he was surrounded by a number of candidates from that region, but not Paul Chang. However, Mark Carney said he had other things to be doing and he couldn't be at that housing announcement. It was a significant housing announcement from the Liberals. They said that they're going to have the biggest housing boom since the post-war era. It's a $35 billion program that they say will help build 500,000 homes a year. And basically, Mark Carney outlined a plan to create an organization that he's calling Build Canada Homes, and it will serve as a developer on new projects, providing financing for affordable home builders, work with industry, unlock federal lands to build more homes. That, by the way, also a conservative promise, and have $10 billion in low-cost financing to build these affordable homes. But it is worth noting, Natasha, he's not the first Liberal leader to invoke sort of this post-war building boom. I can remember hearing it from the Trudeau government as well, specifically an announcement that then Housing Minister Sean Fraser made, where he said he was going to launch a housing catalog of prefabricated homes that people could build, as happened in the post-war era. But I will say that was in 2023, and that catalog still isn't finished yet. So Mark Carney will have to measure himself up against his own party's background in homes and affordability, which we know is an area that the Conservatives have made significant hay over in recent years.
Okay, CBC's Kate McKenna in Ottawa. We'll come back to you, Kate, in just a few moments. But first, as promised, let's go to St. John, New Brunswick, where Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre is making a campaign announcement.
Let's build now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, John, for your introduction. Thank you also to the great Melissa Young, who has worked in carpentry and has been promoting the trades. She's obviously from New Brunswick, but she has been working across Canada to recruit our youth into boots, not suits, so that we can build the economy of the future, make our country strong again to stand up against American economic aggression. And here we are in St. John, not by any coincidence. We're in this place because it symbolizes both our long history and our optimistic future. This is the place where we come to move our products over the Atlantic to the world. It is one of the great cities of the Atlantic that will be greater still and bigger and bolder into the future. Well, it's here today that we reflect upon the great East-West nation that John A. Macdonald dreamt of and began building. That's why Louis St. Laurent built the St. Lawrence Seaway to open up the Canadian heartland to the world. These projects boosted our economy and guaranteed our economic independence. But I have a question. Do you think we could get the St. Lawrence Seaway open today? Do you think we could build the Canadian Pacific Railway today? Really, think about it. There'd be some environmental extremist like Stephen Guilbeault, or maybe Gregor Robertson, the new Liberal candidate, former Vancouver mayor, who'd be chaining themselves to a tree to prevent it from happening. And it would take a decade to go through a bureaucratic process that would never lead anywhere. How many projects have the Liberals killed already? 16 major energy projects, $176 billion that we know of. There were 18 LNG liquefaction plants proposed 10 years ago when the Liberals took office. Not one has been completed. The only one that's close was approved by the previous Harper government. They blocked two major pipelines, both the Energy East and the Northern Gateway pipeline. Mr. Carney testified in committee against the Northern Gateway pipeline, which would have allowed us to move 500,000 barrels of oil to Asia every single day. Now that oil goes to the Americans at a discount, making us even more dependent on what is now a very aggressive southern neighbor. It is time to reverse the lost Liberal decade of blocking projects and moving money out of the country. It is time to take back control and relaunch our economy, to unleash our energy sector and bring home our jobs and powerful paychecks. It is time to turn Canada into an economic fortress that puts our country first for a change. With Donald Trump threatening our country with tariffs, we need big projects that link our regions east to west. We need to be able to get our resources across Canada, bypassing America, so we can trade more with each other and sell our resources to the world. Under the Liberals, this kind of big thinking has become impossible. The average time it takes to get a mine approved is 17 years, 23% longer than Australia, 38% longer than in the US. Canada now ranks 23rd in the World Bank's ease of doing business. We fall in 7 places. We're the second slowest country in all of the 36-nation OECD to get a building permit, the second slowest. The Liberals' radical keep-it-in-the-ground agenda killed 16 major energy projects and billions of dollars. And then think of the number of businesses from around the world who don't even bother proposing a project in Canada because it is a waste of time and money under the Liberals' keep-it-in-the-ground economic policy. Since the Liberals killed the Energy East pipeline, and let's make no mistake, they did kill the Energy East pipeline. You know, they'll claim that TransCanada just changed its mind. Really? So the company spent $1 billion on getting the project approved, only to sort of one day say, oh boy, the price of oil has gone down this week, we're going to cancel the whole thing. Give me a break. This is a 100-year investment. It doesn't get canceled because the weekly price of oil went down. It got canceled because the Liberals changed the rules in the middle of the game. And let's be clear, Liberal No New Pipelines Law C-69 will make it impossible for any other project to ever get approved in this country. And Mark Carney could have repealed that law. I encouraged him to reconvene Parliament after he won the Liberal leadership race and quickly, under emergency conditions, repeal C-69. He didn't do it. So it doesn't matter what he says about the law now. We know he doesn't mean it, because he could have done it. It is a Liberal law that they passed, that they brought in, and that they have defended. And it is the same Liberal ministers, same Liberal MPs, same Liberal strategists, same Liberal promises that they made 10 years ago. If you vote the same, you will get the same by re-electing the same Liberal gang. The only difference now is they have a weaker and more compromised Liberal leader. While Mr. Carney was advisor to Justin Trudeau, he supported all of the same radical keep-it-in-the-ground policies, but not only because he believes in it, because he profited from it. By pushing resource projects out of Canada, his investments overseas and in the States become more profitable. Less competition from Canada means globalist elitists like him get richer and fatter. He supported his entire business career, so-called business career, was about defunding Canadian energy, convincing banks to stop lending to Canadian energy companies. He supported C-69. He still supports the energy cap. Just last week, one of his ministers said that he wants to, they're going to keep in place a cap on Canadian energy production that doesn't apply in the United States. Even more billions will leave the country under that policy. Mr. Carney says he supports an industrial carbon tax. Again, a tax that applies on Canadian businesses but not on American ones, which will, this is another area where Mr. Carney and Mr. Trump agree. Both want to tax Canadian industry. With Carney, it's a carbon tax. With Trump, it's a tariff. But the effect is the same. It will drive tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars south of the border because there is no such tax on the U.S. side. Mr. Carney supports the same policies that have driven $500 billion out of our country over the last decade of the lost Liberal period. And he will say anything he has to. He lied about the fact that he plagiarized 10 times in his thesis in order to get his degree. He lied about having moved his headquarters from Canada to the U.S. just 6 days after Trump threatened tariffs on our country. So you can count on him to say whatever he has to say in order to hold on and get the Liberals that fourth term in power. But under the Liberals, applications are lengthy and the economy is crashing. Why would any other company invest in this country with a long Liberal record of high taxes and blocking projects? But the good news is, we don't have to, after this lost Liberal decade, we don't have to elect them to a fourth term. We can choose change by putting Canada first, with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build homes, unleash our resources, and bring home paychecks and production so we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength. Today, I'm unveiling yet another concrete proposal to bring about that vision. Today, I'm announcing the Canada First National Energy Corridor, a pre-approved corridor that will allow our incredible businesses to build pipelines, transmission lines, rail lines, and countless other kinds of infrastructure that we need to break our dependence on the Americans, ship our resources to ourselves and overseas markets, bring home powerful paychecks for our country, and stand up for ourselves in a position of strength. Here's how it would work. First, we would use the model of the shovel-ready zone. That is to say, the permits would be pre-authorized. After consultations and environmental research, we would find the path that is safe for our citizens and for nature. Second, we would consult with First Nations, as is our duty under the Constitution of Canada. Third, we would lock down the permits and we would publish specifications and standards that companies have to meet so that they would do the projects in a responsible way that keeps everyone safe. Then the permits would be pre-published online and legally binding. In other words, the government would not have the legal right to reverse course and change its mind. This would remove the uncertainty. I understand why businesses after the lost Liberal decade would not want to take the risk of starting an application process that could cost them billions of dollars if they thought that maybe a future government would reverse course. That's why pre-approval is so important. Pre-approving the project would mean that the companies could invest with certainty, knowing what they have to do and what they can build. This certainty will allow the private sector to do the building. It will allow our businesses to invest, hire, and grow. It would also allow us to become independent from the Americans, going around them directly to ourselves and to others. We can build Canadian pipelines with Canadian steel to deliver Canadian energy to a Canadian refinery, perhaps right here in St. John. And that will cause a massive economic boom. Billions of dollars will flood into our government coffers from the resulting economic growth, money that can be used to improve our failing hospitals and our schools, building roads and other infrastructure we need, defeating poverty and lifting up our people, giving new jobs to our young tradespeople, 350,000 of whom we are going to train up through our Boots Not Suits plan. It will mean a new era of prosperity, and it adds to a broader plan that we've been systematically unveiling. For example, just yesterday, I announced the Canada First reinvestment tax cut. Zero capital gains tax if you reinvest in Canada. You sell your business and you reinvest in a Canadian stock that funds Canadian economic growth, zero capital gains tax. You sell a rental property and reinvest it in building a new home in Canada, zero capital gains tax. You're a company that wants to sell a vacant piece of land to reinvest in building a new factory in Canada, zero capital gains tax. You want to take your money out of Canada to a foreign jurisdiction, you will pay capital gains tax. That's why it's called Canada First. We're going to be bringing home hundreds of billions of dollars and unleashing a boom. This will be economic rocket fuel for our Canadians to launch above and beyond the Americans. We will cut income tax by 15% for the average worker and senior. So that means that more of your pension and your paycheck will go home to your family rather than into government coffers. And speaking of home, we'll get rid of the GST. We will axe the federal sales tax on new homes, saving you up to $65,000 on a purchase or $3,000 a year in lower mortgage payments. And we will axe the carbon tax. But unlike the Liberals who brought in the tax and who are just going to hide it for the next month leading up to the election, we will axe the tax for everyone, for everywhere, for good, for real, for a change. we will unleash an incredible economic boom that will turn Canada into a fortress. We'll honor the legacy of John A. Macdonald and Louis Saint-Laurent by adding pipelines, power lines, roads, rail that bind the nation together. One nation, bound together into a united country, self-reliant, sovereign, standing on its own 2 feet and standing up to the Americans from a position of strength. The choice is clear. After the lost Liberal decade of costs and crime up and the economy down under the American thumb, can we afford to give Liberals a 4th term? Or is it time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build homes, unleash our resources to bring home our jobs so we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength? Canada first for a change. Let's bring it home.
Thank you. We will now take questions from the floor.
With St. John being the most trade-prone city in Canada and New Brunswick sending 92% of its exports to the United States, what would Conservative government do to help through this trade war and beyond?
Thank you. That's a very good question. This is one of the most trade-intensive economies in the world, St. John in particular, New Brunswick in general. We'll make sure that businesses have the cash they need, the liquidity required to pay their bills and keep people working. Our goal is to keep people working through this trade dispute. And furthermore, we need to retaliate against the Americans targeting goods we don't need, can make ourselves, or get elsewhere, so we maximize the impact on them while minimizing the impact on ourselves. Then I will present President Trump with a choice. Either you start a trade war with America's closest friend and neighbor, which will weaken both our economies, rendering our continent more vulnerable to risks from abroad, or you knock down the trade barriers, we trade more as two separate sovereign nations, we enrich both sides of the border, allowing us to spend massively on our military, so that both Canada and the U.S. separately, but cooperating together, are stronger, safer, and richer. I believe, presented with that choice, particularly as they get closer to midterm elections, I think that the Americans will, in the end, be forced to reverse these disastrous tariff policies. But we can't rely on the Americans to determine our economic destiny. Your question, it contains in it the problem. Why is it that after the lost Liberal decade, we are so dependent on the Americans for everything? For example, if the Energy East pipeline were approved today, there would be 1 million barrels of oil going from St. John to Europe. It's almost $100 million, depending on the price of oil. It's almost $100 million a day that would be transiting through here, paying refinery workers and all the businesses that they shop at around here to sell to Europe, and the Americans wouldn't be able to do a damn thing about it because it would have been a direct transit out of North America to an overseas economy. We need to bring that home. If we had a national energy corridor today, St. John would not be so reliant on the Americans. We'd be able to transit billions and billions of dollars through this incredible city without worrying about what the Americans think. And that is what we're trying to do with this Canada First policy. And the choice in the election is, after a lost Liberal decade, with costs and crime up and the economy down under the American thumb, do they deserve a 4th term in power, or is it time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build a national corridor, ship our resources around the world while bringing powerful paychecks home, making us strong enough to stand up to the Americans? Thank you.
En français.
Merci beaucoup. Une très bonne question.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. We will have to retaliate against the United States in order to protect our economy and target U.S. products that we don't need, that we can produce ourselves, or that we can buy elsewhere in order to maximize the impact on them and minimize the impact on Canada. At the same time, the question is a good one. Why is St. John so dependent on the United States? And that is because after the lost Liberal decade, we cannot sell our resources overseas. If the Liberals had not killed Energy East today, there would be 1 million barrels of oil every single day that would be transiting through St. John's on its way to Europe. Workers at the Irving refinery would have a lot more work. All the small businesses would have won as well. But by blocking that project, the Americans can monopolize that million barrels every day. And just to put that in context, 1 million barrels a day is $80 million in economic value going through St. John. So we don't need to elect the Liberals for a fourth term after the lost decade, where they blocked energy projects. We can put Canada first with a new Conservative government that will cut taxes, greenlight energy projects, and ship our products east-west, including to Europe. That is how we will declare our independence from the United States and give people right here in St. John and elsewhere the ability to be economically strong. That is the choice. Put Canada first for a change and defend Canadian interests for a change.
Next question.
Hi, Nick Murray with the Canadian Press.
Hi there.
I can let you take a drink of water if you'd like.
Thank you, sir. That's very nice of you. I wish it was something stronger, but I'll take it. They've got a lot of breweries around here, right? Moosehead. Moosehead's right over there. So that's our next stop?
I think we're going to a Union Shop instead.
Oh, well, that will be fun too, but I think we should have worked that in. And you should have, we should have offered you guys some Moosehead before the press conference. I think you would have asked more sympathetic questions.
I've been to the small batch here. It's quite good.
Okay.
Sir, there are reports on mounting frustrations about how the campaign is going and the trailing polling numbers. What's your plan to turn things around, and will you make changes to the campaign leadership?
Some people have said that I should stop talking about the doubling housing costs that have denied an entire generation the chance to own a home after the lost Liberal decade. They say that we shouldn't be debating why single moms are lined up at food banks in record numbers after the lost Liberal decade. They suggest that we shouldn't debate why 50,000 of our citizens have lost their lives to drug overdoses under the radical Liberal drug policies. That we should just forget that after the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, that we should just ignore all of those things. I disagree. My purpose in politics is to restore Canada's promise so that anyone from anywhere can achieve anything. It's hard work gets you a great life and a beautiful, affordable home on a safe street, protected by brave troops under a proud flag. All the things that we need to do to respond to the economic aggression of the Americans are things I've been talking about for 10 years. I was standing up for pipelines 10 years ago when Mark Carney was opposing them. I've been saying that we need to approve resource projects quickly for the last 10 years while Mark Carney was supporting C-69 and the energy cap and other Liberal policies. I've stood up for tax cuts that will unleash growth in our economy over the last 10 years, in fact, over my entire career. The threats, the unjustified threats by President Trump further strengthened the argument in favor of the Canada First agenda that I've been fighting for my whole life. And while we propose those solutions, we will not forget the single mom who can't afford food. We will not forget the seniors who are choosing between eating and heating. We will not forget that young 36-year-old couple whose biological clock is running out faster than they can afford to buy a home and have kids. We will not forget the families terrorized by crime and drugs, and so we will continue, despite calls to the contrary, to talk about those things, even if I am the only leader in the country that offers any change. And the choice, again, is whether, after this lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime, with our economy falling under the American thumb, do we give them, can we afford to give them a fourth term? Or is it time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government that will restore Canada's promise?
En français.
Merci beaucoup. Some
people are saying that I should stop talking about the doubling of housing costs after the lost Liberal decade, that I should simply ignore young families who would like to be able to buy a home, to have a family and raise children. Some say I should stop talking about single mothers who can no longer buy food and who are part of the record of 2 million people who have to go to food banks now. Some are saying that I should just stop talking about the wave of criminality brought about through the automatic releasing of criminals by the Liberals. Some people think that I should ignore that. But we're going to protect Canadians. We're going to bring forward the same policies that I've always supported: cutting taxes, eliminating red tape, getting our economy back on track, and taking control of new energy projects. All of those policies are exactly what we need now to strengthen our economic fortress in relation to Donald Trump. And the choice in this election, after the lost Liberal decade, where costs have been rising and the economy has been dwindling, so that we're more dependent than ever on the United States, is that what we need? Or do we need to put Canada first with a new Conservative government that will cut taxes, build housing, greenlight energy projects, and bring back jobs to Canada so that we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength?
Thank you. Next question.
Good morning. Just going back to the energy corridor, what would that mean for Energy East? And has a private investor come forward to reignite that plan that's been dead long ago?
So, you're right to point out that the Energy East project was killed by the previous Liberal government, and right now, today, it would be impossible for any pipeline to be built because there's a no new pipelines law, C-69, that the Liberals have passed into law and kept in place with Mark Carney's support. People say, well, there's no company to build it. Well, of course, when pipelines are banned, you're not going to get a company to step up and announce they're building a pipeline. When you have a new government that repeals the anti-pipeline Liberal law, and then you put in place a pre-approved corridor that removes the uncertainty, all of a sudden it becomes very attractive. So the chicken and egg problem we have today is that as long as the anti-pipeline law and government are in place, no one is going to put their name forward to build anything in Canada, even as pipeline construction is booming all around the world, because pipelines are, of course, so wildly profitable. The only way that you get the investment is to repeal the anti-pipeline law and bring in a pre-approved corridor so businesses know they will never again have to spend 7 years and $1 billion to get to a dead end. You, in fact, give them the corridor that gives them the light at the end of the tunnel and a certainty for the future. That's how you put Canada first. And then the choice in this election is the following. After the lost Liberal decade, where they blocked Energy East along with $178 billion of projects, should we elect them to a fourth term? Or is it time for a new Conservative government that will put Canada first by rapidly building a national energy corridor cutting taxes and bringing home the billions of dollars Liberals pushed out of Canada so that we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength.
En français.
Merci beaucoup de votre question.
Thank you for
La
your
question,
question.
c'est est-ce que
The question
il y a une entreprise qui
is
veut maintenant
whether
bâtir
there is a
Énergie
company
Est
that
ou un
would
tel
like to
projet?
build Energy
Évidemment,
East.
c'est impossible aujourd'hui
Obviously,
de
it's
bâtir quoi que ce soit
impossible
parce qu'il y a la
today
loi
to build anything
C-69
because
libérale
the liberal
anti-pipeline.
bill
Aussi
C-69
longtemps
is an
que cette loi est
anti-pipeline
en
bill.
place,
And as
il
long
va
as that
jamais y
legislation
avoir
is
une
placed,
proposition
there will
pour un
never
pipeline.
be any
Parce que
proposal
c'est
to build a
banni.
pipeline because they're
Il
banned.
n'y aura pas de projet.
There won't be
Monsieur
any
Carney
projects.
aurait pu
Mr.
abroger
Carney
cette loi
could
en
have
devenant
repealed
chef
that bill
libéral.
when
Je
he
l'ai
became
invité
the
d'aller
Liberal
au
leader,
Chambre des
and
communes
I
pour le
invited
faire.
him to go to the House of
J'aurais
Commons
aidé
to make
à
that happen.
adopter
I
une
invited
abrogation
him
de cette loi
to repeal
dans
that
24 heures,
law
mais il a décidé
within
de le garder
24
en place
hours, but
parce
he
qu'il
decided to
est
keep it in
toujours
place
contre les projets.
because he is still
Si les
against
libéraux
such
sont
projects.
réélus, il va
If the
jamais
Liberals
y
are
avoir une
re-elected, there will be
proposition pour
never,
construire
there will
quoi
never
que ce
be
soit
any
à travers
proposal
le
to
Canada.
build anything across Canada.
En abrogeant la loi
By
anti-pipeline des
repealing
libéraux,
the
en adoptant
anti-pipeline
un
law
corridor national
and
énergétique
bringing in
avec
a
des
national energy
préautorisations pour des
corridor
projets
with
massifs,
pre-approvals
les
for
entreprises
large
vont voir
projects,
comment ça peut se
businesses
faire.
will start to see how
Et
this can
ça
happen.
va inviter les investisseurs
And that
de
will
construire
prompt
des projets à
investors
travers le
to
Canada.
build
Donc, la
projects
question
across the
pour les
country.
élections
So
qui
the
s'en
question
viennent,
in this
c'est après que les
election
libéraux
is,
ont bloqué
after the
178
Liberals
milliards de
blocked
dollars de projets
$178 billion
et banni
worth
les
of projects and banned
nous rendant plus
pipelines,
dépendants
making
face
us
aux
more
Américains.
dependent on the United States.
Est-ce qu'on peut leur donner un quatrième
Can
mandat
we
ou est-ce
give
que
them
c'est
a
le temps de
fourth
mettre le
mandate,
Canada
or is it
d'abord
time to
pour
put
faire
Canada
changement
first for a
avec un
change
nouveau gouvernement
with a new
conservateur
conservative
qui va
government
abroger la loi
that will
anti-pipeline,
repeal the
bâtir un
anti-pipeline
corridor
law,
économique
build
et
an economic and energy
et
corridor,
ramener des centaines
and
de
bring
milliards
back
de dollars
hundreds
ici
of
au
billions
Canada
of dollars to
pour
Canada
répondre aux Américains dans une
to
position
stand up to
de
the United
force.
States from a position of
Thank you.
strength.
We will now take a call-in question from the phone line, and this will be the final question.
Thank you.
Sébastien Ladesseur at Summit FM. Please go ahead.
Bonjour, Monsieur Poilievre.
Hello,
Sébastien
Mr.
Ladesseur de
Poilievre.
Route 17. Vous avez mentionné de faire une riposte aux États-Unis.
You mentioned
concernant les
retaliating it
tarifs
against the
douaniers.
United States
Mais pour
and their
le
tariffs.
secteur la circonscription du Madawaska resté gauche,
But in the
c'est
Madawaska
beaucoup,
riding,
sur la ligne des douanes et tout ça, parce que
those people are really on the
la
front
région
line of these
d'Edmundston
tariffs.
qui
There's Edmundston, for example,
subit déjà des conséquences,
which
et
is
également
already
de-
feeling the
beaucoup de
consequences
compagnies
of
de bois
this, and there are a
d'œuvre
lot of
qui,
lumber companies as well
qui dépendent beaucoup d'exportations.
that very
Alors,
much
quelles
depend
seraient
on
vos
their
actions
exports
pour
to the
aider les
U.S. So what can you do to
entrepreneurs
help
et
these
afin de contrer justement les
consumers
tarifs
and
américains?
companies to fight back against the U.S.
Très bonne
tariffs?
question, et
That's
c'est
a
vrai
very
qu'au
good question,
Nouveau-Brunswick,
and it's
les
true
effets
that
sont,
in New
particulièrement,
Brunswick, the effects
néfastes.
are particularly
Évidemment, on a besoin
negative,
de
injurious,
liquidité pour les
and
entreprises,
we need to ensure there is
directement
liquidity
affectées,
for companies that are directly
les
affected
travailleurs dans leur
so that
poste
they can keep their
cette
employees
guerre tarifaire.
during
On va
this
donner
trade
ce
war.
support.
We
Le
will
but,
provide
c'est de
that
garder
support.
les
The idea
travailleurs
is
dans
to
leur job.
keep workers in their
Parce
jobs
que ils veulent pas aller sur chômage, ils veulent
because they don't
continuer
want to
de
go on
travailler.
unemployment. They want to
Et on veut
continue to
pas
work.
que leur travail soit
And we want to
interrompu
ensure
pour 2-3 ans.
that their
Si,
work is
en fin
not
de compte,
interrupted
on est
for 2 or
capable de
3
résoudre la
years.
guerre tarifaire
But
plus rapidement
if it
que ça.
happens, we want to be able to support them.
Deuxièmement,
And we certainly would hope to resolve the
votre
issue
question
more quickly than that. Now,
comprend
your
le
question
problème. Pourquoi est-ce que notre
brings
pays
out the
est aussi
problem.
dépendant des
Why
Américains
is our
après
country
la
so
décennie
dependent on the
perdue
United
des
States
libéraux,
after the lost
où,
liberal
les
decade,
libéraux, les
where
Américains reçoivent
the
100% de
Americans
notre
are
gaz
receiving
naturel,
100% of our natural gas,
90% de notre pétrole,
90% of our oil,
presque tout notre bois,
almost all our
80,
softwood lumber,
excuse-moi, 75%
75%
nos exports.
of our
Pourquoi
exports.
est-ce qu'on dépend autant
Why
sur
do
les
we
Américains?
depend to that
Il nous
extent
faut
on the
bâtir
United
une
States?
forteresse
We have to
économique.
build an economic fortress in Canada.
renverser les
We
politiques
have to reverse the anti-resource
et
policies
pro-taxes et impôts
and
des
pro-tax
libéraux qui a fait
policies of the
fuir
Liberals
500
that have
milliards
driven
dehors.
$500 billion
Et il faut, au contraire,
abroad. And we have to choose a new Conservative government that will put Canada first for a change, to greenlight major infrastructure and energy projects, allow us to sell our products overseas, and to ensure there is proper trade within Canada. That's a real plan for change. I also said I will eliminate the capital gains tax if that money is used to reinvest in Canada. I will remove the tax on new homes and cut taxes by 15% so that workers can spend more in their communities and create other jobs. So again, the choice after 10 years of the Liberals, with costs that are rising, an economy that is declining in relation to the U.S.'s strength. Can we really give a fourth term to the Liberals? Or should we put Canada first with a new Conservative government that will build, build, build? Thank you.
Thank you. The question was about rural and remote communities in New Brunswick and other smaller towns that have already been hit by this terrible trade dispute. The question was whether what actions we should take to protect those jobs. We will make sure that businesses have...
Okay, friends, we've been taking you to St. John, New Brunswick, listening in on the announcement made by Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre and the questions and answers from reporters. We are playing that back for you because we missed the... we were playing Mark Carney initially because he started speaking first, and as promised, we carried the entirety of Pierre Poilievre's comments from there. So the big announcement coming from the Conservatives today is this announcement of a national energy corridor, essentially laying out their plan for wanting to fast-track energy projects across the country. And Pierre Poilievre made a point of saying this is one of the best ways to combat this incredible imposition of the United States and our dependence on the United States to get our economy growing and expanding. So let's turn to CBC's Evan Dyer, who's also covering the Poilievre campaign, and he's in that exact spot live for us now from St. John. So you were listening in. What were the key takeaways for you, Evan?
Well, I guess we should certainly come back to those tariffs and point out that one of the most interesting things about the location, the venue for this speech, St. John, is that according to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, this is the most tariff-exposed city in Canada, with over 90% of its export trade going to the U.S. That's true. That figure is true for New Brunswick as a whole, but St. John being particularly exposed within this province more than any other city. Other cities around the country that come closer, places like Calgary and Windsor, but this is number one. And so that is one of the reasons that he chose to bring this message here. But another one is geography, too, because a national energy corridor, which would presumably go both east and west, and of course some people also talk about going north to Hudson Bay, that corridor would depend on deepwater ports like the ones that are in this area. In fact, 9 kilometers from here is the Canna Port, which is a super tanker port, and an LNG receiving station where liquid natural gas enters Canada. Of course, if a national energy corridor were constructed, the plan would be to send the energy the other way, to have it come from where it is produced to a place like St. John, and from there to other markets such as Europe, where Canada would be able to break its dependency on the U.S. as the sole or almost sole buyer of Canadian fossil fuel energy. Of course, already we have seen the Trans Mountain expansion open to the West Coast, which has taken some of the pressure off, with about 900,000 barrels a day moving through that pipeline to markets in Asia, principally. But the idea would be to do the same here. Now, what Poilievre was pitching in this speech is a pre-approved corridor. In other words, one where the provinces and First Nations and others along the route have already given their permission for projects to go ahead. And then there's a sort of a written guarantee from the Government of Canada that once given, that permission can't be withdrawn. So therefore, companies would presumably have the predictability that they need to make those kinds of very large investments. But I should point out that we didn't really hear details on how exactly a government would get such agreements from provinces, from First Nations, what it would do differently to get agreement from jurisdictions that in the past have not been that friendly to the idea of pipelines such as Energy East. It's worth noting, though, that there has been quite a bit of movement there, too, in terms of public opinion and provincial opposition on projects like Energy East. We've seen the Quebec government express a new willingness to look at that, not only Energy East, but also, for example, the idea of an LNG pipeline bringing liquid natural gas to Saguenay, Quebec. So there is some movement, but still, it must be said, in this particular announcement, some details missing on how that pre-approval would be secured from stakeholders who in the past have not been all that enthusiastic on these projects.
Okay, CBC's Evan Dyer in St. John, New Brunswick. Thank you, Evan. All right, so we are now into the middle of day 9 of this federal election campaign. We've already heard from the Liberal leader Mark Carney. We brought you those comments a little bit earlier on. Just now, you heard from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. And in less than a couple of hours, we're going to bring you an announcement from the NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. But the question becomes, how well are any of the messages from the leaders resonating with ordinary Canadians? Well, to answer that and more, we have reached Jennifer Stewart. She's a strategic communications expert and CEO of Syntax Strategic. That's a national communications agency. Jennifer, good to have you on the show. Thank you for making time.
Good to be here, Natasha.
So, Jennifer, we just heard from the Conservative leader, so let's begin there. Over the weekend, we were covering the story where a number of Conservative Party members have expressed to CBC News that they're concerned about the direction of the campaign. They're describing it as highly disorganized. They said it's a mess, that the power is far too centralized, the decision-making is centralized, and that the leader isn't focusing enough on Donald Trump and positioning himself as a counter to Donald Trump. We did get a little bit more of that in the messages we just heard from Pierre Poilievre. I wonder how you're feeling about this.
Look, Natasha, those are damning media reports for the Conservative Party. From the Conservative perspective, you can't run a precision race with a paper map. The Conservatives have been calling for an election since 2024, and somehow they're still, they're seemingly caught flat-footed. So, per the reports, the campaign workers are just figuring out their job hours before the starting gun. If that's the case, you're not campaigning, you're scrambling. But just listening in now, we're seeing a very clear pivot to a ballot box issue, which is the US, which is managing President Trump. And even when we're talking about a pipeline going across Canada, at every instance, from a communications perspective, Mr. Poilievre brought that back to how much energy we export to the US. So clearly there's a lot of course correcting that needs to happen, but campaigns are stressful, campaigns are long, and you can win or lose based on the organization of your campaign and how laser focused you are in the ballot box. But look, it might be a one-horse race right now, Natasha, but 28 days is a lifetime in an election.
Absolutely. Well, it brings me back to the point which I just mentioned with you, which is in today's comments from Pierre Poilievre, it felt to me that he was sort of trying to put more of an emphasis. This is the best way to counter Donald Trump. This is the best way to counter the tariffs. He said, some people, when asked a question, some people don't want me to talk so much about single mothers waiting at food banks and people not being able to afford their homes. He went back to the core issues for the Conservatives, which is this cost of living and also making it easier to grow business. And he said he fundamentally disagrees with those who are telling him to talk about this less because he says this is the way to move forward against Trump. So is there enough space there? As you said, 28 days still to go, a lot could change for the Conservatives to bounce back up?
It's a lifetime. There's absolutely enough space, and the Liberals would be remiss to take the polling for granted. And look, it's not necessarily the issues that the Conservatives are focusing on. It's how they tie the nuance of those issues to the trade war, to the tariffs, and to the cost of living, which continues to escalate as a result of President Trump. And this kind of flip-flop we see on tariffs and what sectors are being targeted almost daily. So I think that there was a moment over the weekend where they reviewed their messaging. I would not be surprised if it was Mr. Poilievre himself, and ensured that every piece of policy that they're going to speak to ties back to this trade war, to the tariffs, and specifically to Mr. Trump itself.
Let's turn our attention now to Liberal leader Mark Carney. Not as experienced as the other political leaders, certainly not in campaigning or being a politician. What do you make of the first week of the campaign so far?
It's been pretty steady. Look, it's steady and it's calculated, Natasha. From a campaign perspective,